Blended Podcasts. Brought to you by Blended Audio.
ArtPod is a South African-focused visual arts podcast hosted by Claude Chandler. Join me weekly every Saturday as I'm joined by a new guest who occupies a position within the visual arts community, ranging from fine arts, tattooing, framing, and logistics. Welcome to the second episode of ArtPod. I'm joined today by the talented and extremely handsome Ronald Muchatuta. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Muchatuta.
Great. Well, just going back to the extremely handsome part, every time I see you, you are always so well presented and well dressed. Is that a big part of your artistic identity or just personal identity?
So it actually is a combination of things from the past, because many years ago I used to work for a clothing company that used to buy clothes, hip-hop clothes from New York and sell them in Zimbabwe. That was like around 2004 to 2006. That's when I used to work there. So I'm kind of really clued to fashion and putting things together and stuff like that from the perspective of working in there. So that part of me has never ended. It kind of like shows in various ways and means, especially when I buy certain things and put things together. So I guess I really know, or I kind of understand how to present myself in terms of my day-to-day looks and stuff like that, yeah.
For sure, and I think in terms of fine art, there's a sense of professionalism that people don't lend to it. They always think of the scruffy, struggling artist. And I mean, it is refreshing to see you carry yourself as such. So you're a multidisciplined artist. You work with paint, you draw, and you also work with mosaics.
Yes.
From the research I did, I see you started in 2001 with mosaicing?
No, so in 2001, I used to work for a pottery company called Roseburn Pottery in a small town called Rua. That's like 30 kilometers outside of Harare. So basically, we would decorate pottery. My job was to decorate pottery, and the business would export all the pottery and stuff around the world and stuff. So that was my first entry point, and from then I got into a mentorship program through a gallery called Gallery Delta, and that's where it all started. And then I think the mosaic school actually happened in 2010 at Spear Art Academy.
Yeah, so for the people listening, you're originally from Harare, Zimbabwe, correct?
Yes, yeah.
And when did you come through in 2010 for the Spear?
So I came to South Africa in 2007.
Okay.
But the mosaic school, I started in 2010.
All right. And in terms of education, you didn't go through the tertiary route, or did you?
So what I did was, when I was in Zimbabwe, I did I would say it would be almost like tertiary.
Okay.
But not. So what I did, there's something they call O-level JCE and A-level JCE. GCE O-level and GCE A-level, and that's kind of like in between university and matric in a way. So I did those exams, and then that was through the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, and then through those exams I got mentorship through the Gallery Delta in Zimbabwe, and then after that I think the mosaic school was another extension of the educational part, but it was through learning a new medium in a sense.
Sure, and I know you said your parents are very supportive of your career choice. Was the kind of the education part of it just to kind of show a sense of commitment or dedication, or just you felt that you had to go those routes too?
So I think my life history has been one where my parents wanted to mold my future before they could actually figure out what I could do. And I think the aspirations was much more based on like doctor, lawyer, you know the drill.
Sure.
And after some time, they realized that I had a thing for art. Like, so for them, they didn't understand how to approach it because this is something new and they didn't understand. So they used to have people around them who would alert them of the possibilities that I could have. And I think that made them realize that how far I could take myself with that. And I think with my father, it was much more about like, you need to go to art school, but we couldn't afford it at that time. So I think, because eventually he passed away, but through the process of him passing away, I eventually kept on with the idea of wanting to go to art school, and then I started going to art school like from 2002 to 2004, through the Gallery Delta and stuff like that in Zimbabwe. And so I think it was until now, it has been a case where I think it's just fulfilling those desires that they had.
I'm sure your father would be very proud, Ronald. So the shift to Cape Town, I mean, you deal a lot with immigration and xenophobia. Before we get into that, the shift from Zimbabwe to Cape Town in terms of the art scene, what were the big differences?
So the time I left Zimbabwe, there were only like 2 galleries in Harare. There's the National Gallery of Zimbabwe and Gallery Delta, where I got my mentorship from. And I eventually came down here, and it felt like the creative gallery scene in South Africa and in Cape Town specifically was much more bigger. There was quite a huge pool of galleries. But most of the galleries, for some strange reason at that time, were not positioned as African galleries. They were just galleries. And I think the time I came was a time when it was the era when pop, I would say, stenciling. The stenciling movement was growing in terms of your Banksys, and your street art and Takashi Murakami and stuff like that on a global scene. And here, I mean, artists like Faith 47 were also picking up, and you would have pockets of artists like Nicola Shlobo, Nandipa, Zanele Moholi, the Google Collective, and different artists just, but it wasn't as saturated as it is now. In terms of having diasporan artists and artists within the continent having exhibitions. So at that time, it was a little bit challenging to actually say you're going to have an exhibition, because you had to sort of like pay your dues and let yourself get to be known by the art scene and stuff like that. So it was a challenge, but I would say that it was much more, the pool was much more bigger than in Zimbabwe.
And you've been here for quite a while. I've only been here for about 7 years.
I think this is my 12th.
So even I've seen the shift that's taken place, a massive shift. I mean, especially recently with the Zeitz Marker opening up. And I mean, how do you feel about the Zeitz and what it's doing to the art scene and to the art community in general?
Zeitz is an interesting space because it's sort of like acknowledging the importance of contemporary art and contemporary voices within the continent and also within the diaspora. I think that they are positioned in a way that they make the public aware. I think South Africa or Africa in general, there isn't like that culture of museum going. So I feel like they are also trying to be ambassadors of trying to create a a cultural significant means and ways for people to appreciate art and for people to understand that there's something just bigger than just seeing a painting on a wall. There's the narratives, there's the stories, there's the relationship between the art and the artists and stuff like that. So I think the importance of a space like that is to sort of like bring awareness to the masses and to the public, and to sort of like make people enjoy art and sort of like have it in the sense of like a cultural heritage, and make it ingrained in the society, you know, like the same way somebody would go to church would be the same way somebody would go to a museum. And you know, like I think that's the importance of having a space like that, you know?
No, I definitely think there's been a shift in the zeitgeist, especially the art zeitgeist, and I think like the storytelling has shifted, and I think there's definitely many stories that haven't been told, or from a certain African's perspective, and it's great that you have these giant institutions backing it. It just kind of gives it weight and leverage and importance. You were saying Cape Town almost doing catch-up. I mean, you jumping between the Joburg art scene and Cape Town art scene, especially recently. The difference between that, do you think they were already on that bandwagon a lot sooner?
You mean Joburg in terms of the art scene?
The art scene, and then maybe also a bit more on the Pan-African art scene, or...
I think because of the history of Joburg, I think Joburg has been much more advanced in a sense, and I think Cape Town had to catch up. Cape Town only quite recently, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they had their first art fair compared to Joburg Art Fair. I think Joburg Art Fair was more prominent, and Johannesburg has had the history in regards to like the Rocks Drifts, like these studio institutions that were quite pivotal within the apartheid era, where they sort of like, you know, facilitated space for black artists who wanted to, you know, to learn the medium of art and stuff. So I think Joburg has been very instrumental in creating a niche for black artists and artists to sort of like figure out how to navigate within the era that time. And even now, a lot of corporates investing in artists and also facilitating spaces for artists to be celebrated. And I feel like a lot of artists in Joburg have those platforms where they're celebrated, and it doesn't have to be like mainstream gallery, but it also like financial institutions and stuff. Whereas in Cape Town, it always feels like Cape Town has a very slow pace. It's interesting that there's a lot of museums opening, so I think that influences more visibility, more understanding, and more parallel lanes between missing pockets of history within modern artists, traditional artists, and also pairing up these lanes with the contemporary and see where it all started and where it is now. So I think they kind of complement each other, the both cities, but I think that Cape Town kind of has its own flair in a way, and Joburg is much more like fast-paced, and everything is happening, and the celebrity culture, the music culture is intertwined within the fine art culture also. So it's like here, Cape Town is a little bit distinctive and on its own.
I think like with Joburgians, if you have a conversation with them, you know, their career will always come up. They will never. There's no time. They don't care about anything else, and I think that's great in terms of industry and growth. The art critic Jerry Salt said, you know, the artist's role is to show their inside world to the outside world. And the first body of work that kind of caught my eye from you and really shook me was the African Immigration Series. And you worked with the what's the material, the bag?
The Made in China bag.
The Made in China bag. Can you kind of elaborate more on that series?
So, within migration, urban migration or regional migration, or maybe to a certain extent, international migration, the Made in China bag is a very accessible bag to the people who don't know what the bag looks like. It's a very accessible huge plastic bag that's sold in Chinese shops or wherever, or even on the bus terminuses or something like that, or train stations. It's a bag that's used by a lot of people to ferry goods from one point to another point, and it's quite accessible. So with foreign nationals in South Africa, there's a lot of cross-border trading that happens between Zimbabwe and South Africa, and most of the people who buy goods in South Africa, they load those goods in those bags. And there's been a stigma and an association of those bags with those people. And the history of that bag isn't only in South Africa only. You find the history in between Nigeria and Ghana. So in Nigeria, they call it the Ghana Must Go, because most people from Ghana, they use that bag when they are migrating or buying stuff or whatsoever. So it's the same relationship between Zimbabwe and South Africa. So in South Africa, they call it a Zimbabwe Must Go, or the most popular name is Shangani bag. So because most of the people in Joburg who travel back and forth from Mozambique are Shangani speaking people, and people in Joburg have always used that term to name those bags. But for me, the reason why I used that bag was to sort of like look at the idea of the bag, what's in the bag being very important, and that's what embodies the individual who's carrying it. That's where your sustenance is, that's where your income is, that's where your livelihood is, whatever you have inside that bag. And when the xenophobic attacks happened, I think I was at a point where I was sort of like self-critical about my privilege, as in the sense of like, I don't have that same privilege that somebody, I have a privilege that allows me safety compared to someone else who might not have that kind of safety and is attacked during like a xenophobic situation, at that time. And I had to sort of like think about what if it was me, what would I have done, that kind of thing. So when I started making that work, I was much more focused on reenacting the atrocities that happened to those people, but then sort of like translating them in a way that the viewer would be able to see and understand. But I didn't want to use like a collage the material onto a canvas. I felt like it wouldn't really have that much feeling, it would be much static. So what I decided to do was to sort of like paint and have the pattern have a life form of its own, but then at the same time create a dialogue, a juxtaposition dialogue, and sort of like hybrid element, marrying necklacing and also the bags, the pattern of the bags.
No, for sure. I mean, I think one of the successes of the series is just, it is very tasteful. Like, it's not a shock and awe series, which you could have gone. And as you said, like, there's a certain delicacy of how basically the flesh is made out of that material, and it's they basically really exposed and very vulnerable. And I think, and especially coming from your background and just your kind of familiarity with it, and I think a bit of a responsibility, I think it was done very well. You also did the Astronaut Series, which there is that connection with you in the astronaut suit, and that's the whole thing of your surroundings being so dangerous. You need that kind of protection.
So there's I think because of the society we live in, we are engaged with a lot of stereotypes, and within those stereotypes there's this situation where you are treated as the other. So with the astronaut painting, with me being the astronaut in the painting, the main focus was to sort of like figure out internally how does it feel to be the other in this, galaxy of different people, different cultures, different, So with that painting, the idea was to sort of like use the bag as a oxygen tank for the astronaut, and sort of like extend, because that was the first painting actually. And I hadn't finished the painting, and then so when the second xenophobics of 2011 attacks happened, I started it, but I didn't finish it, and I only got to finish it in 2014, I guess. Reason being that I think I hadn't really formulated a strong conceptual idea and how to execute the aesthetic. So when I found a strong, mature foundation to execute it, then I went back to finish the painting and then continue with and then start with the necklace series. So there's sort of like a connection between two bodies of work, and it was all influenced by having a very strong conceptual process of how to execute the mediums themselves.
And going back to navigating the art scene, especially the gallery scene, having quite a charged topic like that, even if it's done as tastefully and even there's a huge sense of beauty behind the work, did you find it was hard to kind of find a gallery to be on board and like really kind of back you, and there was a kind of a business partnership to kind of grow it together? Or did you feel that there was a bit of resistance, there was a bit of kind of on the gallery's part molding in a certain direction for you?
So when I made the series, I had a consultancy company that I work with called Yellowwoods, and some of that work is in the collection, the Spear collection, the wine farm. And with them, there was no complicated understanding or complex understanding, or they just embraced the work as it is, because I think they understood it and I think it was fresh. With the galleries, it was difficult because I didn't have that, in that time when I made that work, I didn't have that much foot in terms of exhibitions with galleries. I would have exhibitions, but not as frequent. And sometimes I would exhibit that kind of work, but then some of that work has sold, some of it has been sold to collectors overseas. So with the galleries, I would say that it has to be a specific type of curation. And I think that sometimes with gallery spaces, they do have a concern on how they could sell that work immediately. But I think for me, it has always been the case of like longevity, and the more the name grows, then the work would sell quicker or whatsoever. So I guess some people would buy it for a long-term investment, in the sense that at some point it would be for a certain kind of value.
Well, I'm pretty lucky. I scored 2 while they were still affordable.
You bought the first one.
So, I know. When I saw that thing, I was just, completely in awe. I kind of, in many ways, I see you as like the Dave Chappelle of the art scene, where you're kind of very true to your craft, and you've navigated the kind of commercial side very well, where there's a kind of a prestige and you kind of very pure in terms of your vision and your art. And again, I think it's very difficult for young artists, or we do need to feed ourselves and pay rent, but then again, as you said, longevity, and then there's the kind of the short vision, which might, for the now, for the today, offer you that, but in terms of long term, I think you've been a lot more strategic in terms of your strategy. You had a BBC interview that I found quite interesting, where you described yourself as an independent artist. Could you just elaborate more on that?
Okay. So for the longest time, I've been independent, and I never had representation from a gallery. And I think that at some point it was something that I really wanted, but I didn't have the right people vouching for me for some strange reasons. And I think it could have been the process in my making of work. Maybe it could have been a case of maturity, could have been a case of so many things. And I think that there were people watching, but I think some people didn't have the right, it always felt like the bus was always passing me by, and I didn't know why, and a lot of people didn't know why. And I think that the bus is now coming to stop, and a lot of buses are queuing up to stop. so
now you can make them wait a little bit.
Let them wait a bit. So I think it has something to do with the maturity with the work, and I think, and also being familiar and having a name out there constantly, and them seeing what I'm capable of doing and the things that I've done. With the independent thing, I think it was by design, I think, and it wasn't by choice. And I think representation has always been something that I thought about, but then I wanted it, but I didn't know how it would work. In the sense of, if you were to use a formula to get a gallery to come and represent you. So I just decided that I need to play it safe, and not be represented by the wrong people. But I think the one thing that I tried to tell myself before I got representation was to just wait and be patient, and when the right people come, then it will make sense.
Great. Unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time, so we have to wrap this up. Currently, you're represented by the Melrose.
The Melrose Gallery.
Is there any upcoming events or exhibitions you would like to punt?
So currently, I have 3 exhibitions this month. So the first one is at the Melrose Gallery. It's a winter group show that's running until next month. And then I have a group show at Gallery Momo. It's a painting exhibition. It's running until the 10th of August. And then I have a group show that I'm participating in. It's a self-portrait for artists at Glen Carlo. It's a wine estate in between Paul and Stellenbosch. And then there will be something that I'll be part of, but I can't say.
Okay,
yet,
well,
but you will know when the information comes out.
Well, we'll wait in anticipation. Thank you so much, Ronald. I really enjoyed it, and we'll definitely have you back on.
Sure, thank you very much.
Cheers, thanks. ArtPod is a South African-focused visual arts podcast hosted by Claude Chandler and produced by the generous assistance of Blended Podcasts, brought to you by Blended Audio.